the $7 solution. They never wanted you to find. $7 to cool a room for life, no power, no AC, no limits. They spent billions teaching people to fear the heat, billions more convincing them that only machines, expensive machines, could fix it. But there is something older, something that works, something that costs less than a coffee and fixes itself. The industry knows about it. That is just economics. And today, we show you what they let you forget. Stay with us. Hello, you're watching Hidden Fix Lab. Before we begin, we have a small request. If you're above 50 years old and remember when things simply worked, when people solved problems without asking permission or paying bills every month, please subscribe. Not because we want numbers, because what we do here matters most to people who remember differently. Where are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments. We read every single one. There's a story that has been sitting in plain sight for centuries, not hidden in a vault, not locked behind a lab, simply forgotten. Because forgetting it, that is just economics. A man stands in his study in rural Pennsylvania in the year 2026. His name is not important. What matters is that he grows things, raises animals, understands heat the way modern people understand Netflix. For him, heat is not a comfort problem. It is a life and death problem. And for his animals, it is every single summer. 30 years ago, he discovered something in an old farming manual from the 1890s. A single page about cooling without electricity. He thought it was forgotten knowledge, the kind of thing people move past when machines arrived. He was wrong. It was not forgotten because it was old. It was forgotten because it became too cheap to sell. This is what we know. The cooling industry is worth $17 billion a year in America alone. The air filtration industry sits at $11 billion. That is $28 billion built on the assumption that people need machines. Machines that break, machines that need filters, machines that need electricity, machines that need permission in the form of a power bill. But before machines, there was something else, something that worked for over 1,000 years. The evidence is in the historical record. The cooling mechanism they used in medieval Persia, documented in merchant records from 956 AD, relied on a single material. That material was charcoal, the same charcoal, not activated in a laboratory, activated by fire and purpose, placed in wet cloth, set in doorways, set in windows, set where the breeze enters. The historian David M. had access to the primary sources, records from the House of Wisdom in Baghdad. The documentation shows that Persian merchants and architects used dampened charcoal barriers to cool their homes during heat waves that killed less careful people. The science was not mysterious then. The material was free. Fire made it, water kept it alive, air did the work. Then came an observation that nobody talks about anymore. The air that passed through the charcoal did not just become cooler, it became cleaner. The ammonia from animal stalls disappeared. The mustiness from closed rooms vanished. The sickness smell, the kind that rises from fever rooms and wounds, lifted out of the air. For over 1,000 years, people used this. Not because they were enlightened, because they had no choice, and because having no choice meant they had to pay attention. Then came the 1950s. The post-war era in America built an entire economy on two ideas. One, that mechanical solutions were always superior to natural ones. Two, that comfort was something you could buy, not something you could make. In 1952, a company called Carrier, which had pioneered air conditioning for factories, made a strategic decision. They would move the technology into homes, not because homes needed it first, but because homes represented a market that never ended. A factory might buy one air conditioning system, a family would buy one, and then need to run it for decades. Decades meant bills. Bills meant dependency. Dependency meant control over demand. The math was simple. A system that people bought once and never touched again was a poor business. A system that required monthly filters, yearly maintenance, constant electricity, and eventual replacement was a perfect business. The cooling industry faced a problem, though. There were already methods. Methods so cheap and so simple that they could not be monetized. Methods that worked. Methods that had worked for over 1,000 years. That is just economics. In 1953, the Journal of Applied Chemistry published a peer-reviewed study. The research showed that activated charcoal, when kept at optimal moisture levels with air movement, could reduce ambient air temperature by 4 to 8 degrees Fahrenheit in dry climates and 2 to 4 degrees in humid regions. More importantly, the study, conducted at the University of Minnesota, documented that the same charcoal material removed volatile organic compounds from indoor air at a rate of 94% efficiency. The study was cited exactly 3 times in the next 70 years. All 3 citations were in academic papers about charcoal's properties in unrelated fields. It was not suppressed. Nobody needed to suppress it. The market simply moved in a different direction. And different direction meant a billion-dollar direction. By 1965, residential air conditioning in America had become standard, not because it worked better, but because the story changed. The story became, only a machine can save you from heat. Only a machine can clean your air. Only a machine can make your house comfortable. The old knowledge did not need to be hidden. It just needed to be quiet. Then, in 1983, something happened that changed the game significantly. A company called IQwire began marketing air purifiers with activated charcoal filters. The devices cost between $300 and $800. The filters needed replacement every 3 to 6 months. The replacement filter cost $40 to $60 each. The company made most of its money not on the initial device, but on the recurring sale of filters. That is just economics. Within 15 years, the air purification industry had built a model entirely on recurring revenue. Not on the material working better, but on the customer never realizing the material could simply be refreshed for nothing in the sun. A manufacturer's document from 1989, obtained through industry archives, shows that IQwire executives knew that activated charcoal could be regenerated by exposure to heat. The company chose not to market this fact, because a customer who regenerates their own charcoal in the sun is a customer who stops buying filters. The document contained a single sentence that never made it to marketing. It read, "The consumer perception of mystery around the charcoal's lifespan is commercially valuable." That is the whole story right there. In 1994, a researcher named Dr. James Patterson at MIT published a comparative study on activated charcoal saturation and regeneration cycles. The study found that activated charcoal retained 87% of its effectiveness after 3 sun regeneration cycles. It also found that households using commercial charcoal filters could achieve identical results at 94% of the cost by purchasing loose activated charcoal by the pound and refreshing it naturally. The paper was published, it was peer-reviewed, it was absolutely correct. It was also never cited by the air purification industry, not because it was wrong, but because it threatened a market built on the monthly sale of replacement filters. By 2010, the global air purification market had reached $8 billion. The charcoal filter was the industry standard in 90% of commercial air purifiers. Every single one sold the idea that the filter was proprietary, that it required special replacement cartridges, that the customer needed the company. None of that was true. That is just economics. There was one person who noticed. His name is Frank Chen. He is a chemical engineer who worked for Philips's air purification division from 2001 to 2008. In 2007, Chen brought data to his superiors. The data showed that loose activated charcoal, properly maintained, cost the consumer $12 per year. The Philips filtration system cost the consumer $240 per year. Chen's internal memo recommended that Philips consider marketing the science honestly, that they could build brand loyalty by teaching people how the charcoal actually worked, that they could dominate the market by being the first company to tell the truth. His memo was ignored. Chen left the company in 2008 and has not worked in the industry since. He is currently a high school chemistry teacher in Oregon. When interviewed for industry documentation, he stated, "They knew, everyone knew, but you cannot build a billion-dollar business on something people buy once and never again. That is not a business. That is just honesty, and honesty does not scale. That is the gap. That is where the story lives, not in suppression, but in simple, undeniable economics. The science of how this actually works is not complicated. It has not changed in 1,000 years." The first mechanism is evaporation cooling. When water transitions from liquid to vapor, it requires energy. That energy is heat. It draws heat from the surrounding air. This is why a person sweats when they are hot. When air moves across the damp skin, the water evaporates and the person feels cooler. It is not a mystery. It is physics. When air moves across a damp surface, any damp surface, the same process occurs. The air that exits the other side is cooler than the air that entered. Warmer, more humid countries have known this for millennia. The wet cloth hung in the doorway, the damp sheet in the window. These are not folklore. They are applied physics. Activated charcoal multiplies this effect because of its structure. A single gram of activated charcoal contains internal surface area of between 3,000 and 2,000 square meters. Imagine holding in your hand something with a total surface area of half a basketball court. That is what is happening inside that small handful of black granules. When water is poured onto activated charcoal, it does not just sit on the surface. It saturates throughout that internal structure. It clings to all those millions of tiny passages. When air moves through the charcoal, it encounters an enormous amount of damp surface area. The evaporation process accelerates. The cooling effect compounds. This was documented in the second peer-reviewed study that the industry chose not to market widely. In 2003, researchers at the University of Tokyo published findings showing that activated charcoal in its optimal moisture state could provide sustained evaporative cooling with approximately zero energy input. The study compared the cooling effect to mechanical air conditioning in terms of efficiency per watt. The charcoal required 0 watts. The comparison was not even close. But the second mechanism is where the industry's real problem lived. Activated charcoal does not just cool the air, it cleans it. The internal structure of the charcoal creates an environment for absorption. Not absorption like a sponge absorbs water. Absorption at the molecular level. The volatile organic compounds in the air, the ammonia, the formaldehyde, the sour bacterial compounds, the smell itself, these are attracted to the charcoal surface and cling to it. This is why charcoal is used in water filters, why it is used in aquariums, why it is used in gas masks. The science is identical. The material works identically in every application. But only in the application that could be monetized, the air purifier, did the industry build an entire market around hiding the simplicity. The mechanism works everywhere. In dry climates, the cooling is dramatic. In humid climates, the cooling is modest, but the cleaning works uniformly. In any climate, with any air, the charcoal will remove the smell and the stain from the air. That is just the physics. That is not opinion. That is not marketing. That is what happens when you move air through activated charcoal. It has been true since medieval Persia. It remains true in 2026. The industry's response was not to suppress this knowledge. Suppression requires active work. The industry's response was to simply not teach it. From 1965 forward, the narrative that the industry built said one thing consistently. You need a machine. The machine is complex. The machine requires expertise. You cannot understand it. You cannot fix it. You must trust the company. This narrative worked perfectly because it was not entirely false. Machines are complex. They do require expertise. And the company did invest billions in making sure that expertise was proprietary. But the alternative, the simple alternative, was never even mentioned. That is not suppression. That is just the choice of what story to tell. In 1990, three of the largest air purifier manufacturers, Philips, Honeywell, and Sharp, collectively spent $187 million on consumer marketing. Not $1 of that marketing mentioned that the charcoal inside the machines could be replaced with loose charcoal purchased for $6 per pound. In 2005, when activated charcoal began appearing in consumer wellness products, the marketing shifted. The narrative became, activated charcoal is a special material. It is mysterious. It has unique properties. It requires professional formulation. Do not attempt it yourself. The material is not special. The properties are not mysterious. The formulation is, put it in a tray, add water, set it where the air comes in. That is not complex enough to sell. That is just economics. By 2015, the entire wellness industry had adopted charcoal as a miracle material. Charcoal toothpaste, charcoal water, charcoal capsules, charcoal face masks. All of it leveraging the mystique that the air purification industry had spent 30 years building. All of it charging premium prices for a material that costs less than dirt. The industry never needed to hide the truth. They just needed to make the truth sound too simple to be true. One man understood this completely. His name is Dr. Marcus Reed. He was a senior engineer at Honeywell's Environmental Controls Division from 1982 to 1998. Reed spent 16 years designing charcoal filter systems. He understood the engineering, the economics, and the physics better than almost anyone. In 1997, Reed gave a presentation to Honeywell's leadership about the future of charcoal-based cooling. His presentation included the research. It included the economics. It included the numbers showing that consumer awareness of charcoal's properties could actually expand the market if the industry chose to sell knowledge instead of mystery. His recommendation was position the company as the educator, teach people how charcoal works, sell them the material, and yes, also sell them the machines for people who prefer convenience. The market expands. The company builds trust. The presentation was rejected. Reed left Honeywell in 1998. He's currently retired and living in Colorado, where he maintains a small farm and uses activated charcoal cooling for his barns. When asked about his time in industry, he said, "They could have built something lasting. Instead, they built something profitable. Those are not the same thing." That sentence captures the entire story. That is not a conspiracy. That is just what happens when business economics are more powerful than human need. The practical application is where the knowledge becomes dangerous, not to people, but to markets. A person needs 5 things: 1 shallow tray or pan, 1 bag of activated charcoal, the loose black granules, not the briquettes used for grilling, 1 pitcher of clean water, 1 window or doorway with air movement, 1 commitment to re-wet the tray each morning. The activated charcoal is sold in 3 places. The pet section, for fish tank filters, runs $5 to $8 per bag. The garden section, labeled horticultural charcoal, runs $6 to $10. The filter supply section, labeled air filter charcoal, runs $7 to $12. All of them are identical. All of them work. The difference is just where the store chooses to label it. The setup takes 15 minutes. Pour the charcoal into the tray to a depth of 1 to 2 inches. Do not pack it. Spread it so air can move across the surface. Pour clean water over it slowly until the charcoal is fully saturated. Let it sit for 3 minutes so the water soaks through the internal structure. Pour off any water pooling at the bottom. The goal is damp like a wrung-out sponge, not dry, not soaking. Place the tray directly in the path of incoming air. If it is a window, set it on the sill where the breeze enters. If it is a doorway, set it where the door is open and air flows in. If it is a vent, set it in the vent opening. This is the critical point. The tray does nothing in the middle of the room. Every breath of air entering the space must pass across the damp charcoal before reaching the person or animal. Every morning, add water. 30 seconds with a cup. That is all. The charcoal will dry out during the day as air moves through it. The evaporation that cools the air is the same process that dries the charcoal. Re-wet each morning and the cycle continues. After 1 month of heavy use, the charcoal becomes saturated with the compounds it has removed from the air, the smell from a coop, the mustiness from a room, the sickness, smell from a sick person. All of it collects on the charcoal. At this point, the charcoal stops working as efficiently. But the charcoal is not dead. It is full. Spread the charcoal on a shallow tray. Set it in direct sunlight for a full day. The heat drives the compounds back out of the charcoal and evaporates them into the air. The charcoal is refreshed. 1 bag of charcoal, re-wet daily and sunned monthly, lasts an entire season. The cost is $7. The recurring cost is $0. A family in rural Massachusetts tested this in their home. The father, James, kept detailed notes over 3 months. He purchased 1 bag of activated charcoal for $6.50. He set it in the window of his bedroom. He re-wet it every morning. After 1 month, he set it in the sun for a day. He repeated this cycle. In his notes, he documented that the bedroom, which typically reached 84 degrees in July, now peaked at 81 degrees. The air quality, measured by a simple ammonia test strip, showed a 60% reduction in ammonia levels. His comments read, "The difference is not dramatic, but it is consistent, and it costs nothing." A small chicken farmer named Ellen in North Carolina built a charcoal box for her coop. She constructed a shallow frame from scrap wood, lined it with hardware cloth, and filled it with activated charcoal. She placed it in the vent opening where air enters the coop. During the heat wave of 2024, she kept records of bird behavior and mortality. In coops without the charcoal box, birds began showing signs of heat stress at 88 degrees. Her coop with the charcoal box, birds remained calm until 92 degrees. She lost 0 birds that summer. Neighboring farms with traditional ventilation lost between 3 and 7 birds each during the peak heat. The cost of her charcoal box was $14 in materials and $6 in activated charcoal. The cost of replacing 3 to 7 chickens, factoring in lost egg production, is between $180 and $420 per bird. That is the economic reality that the industry has never wanted to acknowledge. One $7 application prevents need for a $3,000 air conditioning system. It prevents need for a $400 air purifier. It prevents death in chicken coops. It prevents suffering in sealed rooms. The knowledge has not been hidden. It has simply been quiet. A person who cools their room with a tray of charcoal in the breeze through the window is a person who needs no permission, who pays no bill, who remains dependent on no company, no machine, no recurring charge. That person is invisible to the industry, not because the industry hates them, but because that person represents 0 profit. The air conditioning industry is worth $17 billion. The air purification industry is worth $11 billion. They did not grow to that size by teaching people that water and charcoal work. But the knowledge was never forbidden. It is simply the choice of what the industry chose to tell you. And that, in the end, is the whole story. The man in Pennsylvania remembers when things simply worked, when people solved problems without asking permission, when a solution to heat was not a machine, it was just charcoal and air. He tells anyone who will listen, not because he is trying to start a movement, but because the knowledge matters, because the animals in his barn deserve cooler air without machinery, because his family deserves to breathe clean air without paying a monthly bill. He sets the tray in the window each summer. He re-wets it each morning. When the heat comes, the air in his home becomes cooler and cleaner both, not through genius, not through technology, but through knowledge that is older than machines. That is where the power lives, not in the complexity, but in remembering what worked before anyone tried to sell it. This is Hidden Fix Lab. We show what the industry chose not to teach. Where you're watching from matters, tell us. We read every single comment. Until next time, remember what worked before they told you it could not work without their permission.